There we go. Right, we're recording. It's funny, the minute you say we're recording, it's like you suddenly go.
That's right. You change attitude, don't you? Yeah, I know. Yeah. You're right. Yeah. But no, I think we're quite relaxed, aren't we? So it's the Friday afternoon, so we're all okay.
It's a good time to do an interview, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So, for the benefit of people listening to this, do you want to introduce yourself?
So my name's Patrick Hicks, and I'm manager of the Container Self-Storage and Trader Association. I've been running it for the last 5 years. I also run some other associations involved in container shipping, and that's how I got involved in this particular sector of the market. So I've been running associations about container shipping and container ports and container traders, and now we're looking at container self-storage.
So you know all about the business of running associations.
I've been doing it for a while. My background actually is publishing magazines. I did work for a shipping line at one stage, but my background's magazine publishing, and then somehow I got involved in running trade associations, which is interesting because you get to know a lot of different people, and you get some inside the industry, let's say. So it's you see different aspects.
Yeah, definitely. And just for the benefit of any listeners who don't know who I am, my name's Anna Roberts, and I'm the CEO and founder of Explorage.com, the online marketplace for self-storage. So hence why there's a connection here with Patrick. We are members of the CSTA, the Container Self-Storage and Traders Association. I'm very pleased to be as well. So yeah, I thought it'd be good for us to have a chat and just sort of like hear your story, really. I think we recently...
Let me tell you how it started then, Anna, because as I mentioned, we were running a container association about container shipping, and we were looking at container traders, which are people who buy and sell containers. A lot of these traders, their customers are container self-storage operators. And about 4 years ago, one of our main container traders came to me and said, "Oh, Patrick, we need an association to promote the benefits and the professionalism in the container self-storage industry." So I said, "Okay, well, we can do that. Tell me more about it." So we had a long discussion, several long discussions actually. And we said, "Okay, let's develop the Container Traders Association, which we were running originally. Let's just develop that into container self-storage." And we said, we need to really focus on professionalism in the industry. So that all took place in July 2019, and we relaunched things in January 2020. And of course, we had a whole program of conferences and exhibitions we were going to do during 2020. 2 months later, the usual story, pandemic. So we launched it in January 2020 as the Container Self-Storage and Traders Association. And sure enough, we then couldn't move it very far for the next year or two. But we got it going, and we've run a number of webinars over the last 3 years, looking at different aspects of the self-storage industry. And also, we've run a lot of documents, technical documents, and operational documents, really promoting best practice and sharing best practice in the industry. So that's how it all started, and we really got to know it very well, actually. We made lots of good friends over the last 3 or 4 years.
Good. No, I could definitely empathise with the 2020 challenges. I think we'd come up with the idea of Explorage in 2019, and had just very early stage started engaging with storage operators to understand what they wanted. And we were about to just start testing things, and it was 2020, and it was the very first lockdown weekend. And yeah, at that point, as a startup business new to the industry as well, we just thought, right, let's just kind of pause things and see how we ride things out. But it's great that you've managed to sort of go through that.
Sorry, just to interrupt on that particular point. Odd enough, our timing, strange enough, was quite good because, of course, during lockdown, a lot of people had to clear out their garages. A lot of smaller businesses also looked for smaller premises. So actually, there was a big demand for container self-storage during the pandemic, including myself, by the way. I'm now a customer of one of our self-storage members because I was told to clear my garage out as well.
Right, yes. That thing of sitting at home and looking at all the stuff and thinking,
exactly right.
And does the association that evolved into the Container Self-Storage and Traders Association, does that still exist as a separate thing, or have they sort of blended into one?
We're still running the Container Owners Association, which is really for big container shipping lines and container leasing companies. There's about 50 million containers in the world. and they're all owned either by the big container shipping lines or the big container leasing companies. So these companies are operating containers and buying a lot every year, normally several million containers a year. So they have a lot of technical requirements to do with floors and paints and so on. That still exists, but the container traders was the one that we were going to form within that, and then we set up as a separate organization, and that's the one that's evolved into this one. So it's evolved quite nicely. So it runs parallel, and of course a lot of the issues are the same in terms of the quality of containers that people are buying and where they're getting their containers and the components and the technical aspects. But of course it's all linked by the magic word container. Actually, there's a magic word that brings a lot of different people together in different forms.
That's it. Yeah. It means different things to different people, isn't it? I mean, to some people it's like their business pop-up or something, isn't it? And they're being converted for all sorts of reasons. But one of the things that struck me at the recent conference, so the CSTA conference that was a couple of weeks ago, was really when we were speaking to some other supplier members that were supplying containers. It was really the complexity of that logistics operation of containers, and obviously it's been around for
50 years, actually 50 or 60 years.
But it was just interesting, and I, coming from a tech background, I was really interested to see how they were evolving with technology. Yeah,
well, when they started, when the container business started, it was actually started in America, and most of the containers were built out of aluminium because they came out of the trailer industry. A lot of the people who operate in containers were trailer operators, and then they became shipping lines. So they used aluminium containers, and then eventually they realized that they weren't really right for the shipping industry, and that's why they moved into steel containers. And most of the containers originally were built in America, and then Europe, a lot built in Europe. And then over the last 10, 15 years, most of the containers are coming out of China now. So most of the containers in your self-storage facilities that you're dealing with are actually built in China. And there are some other manufacturers elsewhere. And one of the things that they've changed is the paint. Again, quite important from a sustainability point of view, but the paint that was used originally was solvent-borne paint, but China put in regulations a few years ago that solvent-borne paint is not good for the atmosphere. So most of the paint on the containers that we have in the self-storage facilities are waterborne paint. May not be quite so good, but it works for the industry, and it's definitely more sustainable, more environmentally friendly.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Also the floors, sorry to interrupt, but the floors were originally hardwood, but now they've more sort of a bamboo. They're trying to use bamboo rather than a tropical hardwood because people are concerned about the forest deforestation. So.
Okay. It's amazing to see how bamboo is used out in Asia. I know I saw some scaffolding that was very creative in Hong Kong, and coming from a building surveying background, I was just blown away by it.
I guess it works. It seems to hold up, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's incredibly strong. And I guess a lot of this is covered in the book, the history of the shipping container that you were handing out.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, it shows how the guy who started it, a guy called Malcolm McLean, he was a trucker, an American trucker, and in America, when you were trucking things across the states, you had to go from one state to another, and each time you moved from one state to another, you had to have a different license. And he had a big house overlooking the Atlantic Ocean in South Carolina. And he said, there's got to be a better way of doing this. And he could see the oil tankers going up and down. And he said, maybe we should put containers. So he got an old oil tanker and converted it. And the very first shipment was 56 containers, which he converted to his trailers, 56. And they went from New York to Houston. Right. And everyone remembers it as being the 23rd of April, 1956. That was the first proper container movement, and then it grew from there. And now, of course, these ships carrying 24,000 containers. So it's astonishing. They're really amazing. It's just going to everybody's lives. And you don't really notice these containers until a ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal, and then everyone says, "My goodness, look what's happened to our supply chain." If you can't get things coming in, and that was just one ship with 24,000 containers, but it blocked a whole lot of other ones.
I mean, they are quite a sight to behold when you go into port and you see a shipping container, like when we go on the ferry to Dublin. Yes. And you see some of the container ships there, and it's just
they're enormous. Yeah, really enormous. Yeah, I mean, I think they're up to about 24,000 containers these days. So it's a lot of stuff on that.
That's incredible.
And a lot of them, of course, supplying one-way containers which are supplying our markets. So some of them are going backwards and forwards from Europe to Asia. Sometimes they have to be moved back empty, but then a lot of just one-way trips that come into the UK or come into Europe, and then they're sold on to through container traders into the self-storage market, but for other applications as well.
Yeah, and what, like, have you noticed any industry trends or any changes in that respect? Certainly in them coming into the self-storage sector.
I think you're seeing definitely, as I mentioned, the containers are possibly more environmentally friendly in terms of the components that are being used, and they're also lighter than they used to be. So, which is good in terms of if you're carrying 24,000 containers on a ship. That obviously makes a big difference to the weight of the ship and therefore the amount of fuel they're using. So they're tending to be a bit lighter, and the one-trip container sometimes only has three locking bars on the doors instead of the 4 which are used for general container shipping. But generally, they are fairly standard, and that's been the benefit of the container industry, that it's been standard so that the handling equipment is all standardized. When they're repaired, the repairs are all standardized. It's a very early on they realized it was important to have everything as standardized as possible. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think just on, you mentioned about the 3-point locking on the doors. I think somebody was mentioning to me at the conference about that's been quite a step change in how that's affected the self-storage sector, because like in many cases they're actually easier to open. So for customers who were perhaps put off by using container-based self-storage, these 3-bar ones are a bit easier. I know Lizzie, who works with us, who you met at the conference, Lizzie Hudson, she's got one of the old 4-bar self-storage containers, and she quite often complains about, you know, how tricky it is to open, but she manages, you know. She's
they can be very stiff, and also if the container's not aligned straight, it can be slightly an angle and it becomes very stiff as well. So no, you're right. Opening the doors can be a bit of a tricky thing. So
I think once you've got the knack, then it's great, but definitely anything to make that easier. But it's interesting actually, you're saying about them, if they're slightly off level, then it makes it a bit more tricky. I mean, I think that's kind of a bit of a negative perception of the container sector within self-storage, is that they are just containers plonked on a patch of ground. And I mean, speaking to some of the storage operators, container-based storage operators that we have listed on Explorage, you know, they're running it very professionally. You know, the real sort of quality operators, they are making big strides in making sure that those kind of things are addressed, that the site infrastructure is in place, so that really from a user perspective, they're having a great experience. They can just drive up and it's easy to use and they feel safe.
No, you're right. I mean, this whole question, and this is really there has been negative connotations. And one of the things is, for example, just coming back to self-storage in a minute, but there are now temporary housing which is using shipping containers. But if you said I'm putting people in to live in a shipping container, it's a very negative thing. But actually, some of local councils and local authorities have used shipping containers, nicely modified, properly decked out, for temporary accommodation. But newspapers, if they want to, can take it in the wrong way. Oh, look, we're putting everyone into shipping containers. And it's a bit the same with self-storage. You know, you're thinking it can be a negative, but you think these containers are going across the oceans. They're being a lot of rough handling, and they're taking a lot of valuable cargo. So they're pretty well built, they're pretty secure, and therefore they tend to not fall apart. And they're looked after under the various regulations that have to be maintained to certain standards. So when they come to a container self-storage site, sometimes they might only been used once, sometimes they could have been multiple used. But either way, they're pretty rugged containers. But that was only one part of why we were asked to do this self-storage thing. But the other one was the general perception of how good quality these self-storage facilities are. And so that's why we've written these guidelines on preparing the site, make sure that the site is properly prepared, and make sure it's the right kind of infrastructure and the right kind of access as well. So these are all very important, that people obviously do look as to whether they want to use a shipping container or they want to use a warehouse type self-storage facility. And of course, the container self-storage tends to be less expensive, and you
Yeah.
tend to get bigger areas, so bigger containers than you would in an indoor self-storage. But we want to get across this idea that there are a lot of professional companies who are doing this very effectively.
Absolutely, and I think that is starting to be recognised, or it has been, you know, slightly in the last few years. And I'm sure, you know, like as you say, the work you're doing with the guides that you have can only help that. And I mean, one thing that we notice is that very often it's not simply a case of the customer choosing indoor self-storage or container storage or any other kind of storage for that matter. It's pretty much governed by where they're based as well. So like the container self-storage sites tend to be slightly more out of city, for, you know, for obvious reasons, that the extent of land that they take up, and, you know, the drive up capacity and things, which might not be such a requirement for somebody in an inner city who doesn't have a vehicle anyway, and in which case an indoor self-storage facility round the corner is going to be more convenient. So, I mean, that's one of the things we really try and convey, is that it's not as simple as it's either this or that. It's very much a case of where you're based, what's convenient, what suits the customer needs. And, you know, the price is one factor of it, but then it's a blend of,
yes, you're right,
price, security, you know, what's actually best suited for their needs. So
right. But the other thing that's, again, we're trying to get a feel for is the profile. You know, what sort of profile we've got. We tended to think of individuals as storing their own stuff, but I had a phone call from somebody yesterday, and they doing a lot of nationwide maintenance of different types of equipment, and they were looking for where to store a lot of their equipment, and they needed, I don't know, 50 different sites across the country, and they were looking at indoor self-storage, and they were looking at container self-storage, and they said, well, actually, quite often where they're working is nearer to the container self-storage sites, because they're often near industrial units rather than the warehousing sites, and also is partly because of the things they had to store. So it is also, you're right, that there tend not to be so many container self-storage sites in the cities, but, you know, a lot of people live in the suburbs, a lot of the industries are near industrial estates, and a lot of the companies use them.
Yeah.
So,
that's it. I mean, one of the things, so just moving on slightly, one of the things that seems to be quite topical in container storage is ventilation and condensation and that sort of thing. How have you seen that change? How have you seen the industry tackle that?
No, you're right, and that has always been one of the issues. And I think there are technologies available to reduce the condensation, partly through types of paint which are put on the inside of the container, and then there are some things which you can put inside to absorb any condensation. It's actually always going to be a problem. I mean, it always has been a problem with shipping containers. The problem of difference of temperature between outside the container and inside, and the humidity inside the container, which means it condenses. To some extent, the operators of the container self-storage site often do try to educate their customers as to what they should put in there and what they shouldn't. Yeah. And they've probably been more aware of that. I think they've all fronted up to the fact that it can be a problem.
Well, I think we've noticed that they tend to be giving advice such as when you're carrying items into a container to make sure that they're dry in the first place, so you're not taking moisture in. And I know there's some storage operators that have, you know, additional vents on the containers and that sort of thing. So, I mean,
so I'm a customer of one of our members. I made that basic mistake that when I was clearing out things, I had a spare lawnmower, and I put the lawnmower into and it's still got some grass on it. So I think back about a month later, there was, unfortunately, I didn't have anything that really mattered, but there was condensation. I thought I should be taking my own advice. And
yes, exactly. I should know better.
I should know better, yeah, but I didn't.
But I think going back to what you said, these things, they're built to carry goods, you know, valuable goods across the ocean. And I think just sort of trying to take best practice precautions, and it is good to see the sector sort of trying to address it where they can. Then, you know, that's all you can do really. And obviously it seems to be being well received by customers because they continue to use it. So that, you know, that's good to see. Just on the CSTA then, so if you were to be speaking to potential members of the CSTA now, what would you say are the advantages of joining, and why should they become a member?
Thank you. Yeah, well, there's several different advantages. One of them is that we want very much people to feel part of a professional community. So the idea of the CSTA is to promote professionalism, and that's why we do have an accreditation system, which means we do check when a member joins, particularly a self-storage member joins, that we do check that the way that they are operating their facility. Not saying there's anything negative about people who don't have the right facilities in place, but we want to make sure that the security arrangements are proper, the infrastructure, like we just said, and the containers are right. Because there are some bad operators which do give the industry a bad name, and we're trying to avoid those and trying to make sure that members of our association, they get the CSTA logo that shows they're an accredited member, and it shows that they're working to professional guidelines. The other benefits are that we do have guidelines for different sides, different aspects of the business. So that could be anything to do with the container itself, the locking systems. We just talked about locking, the door locking gear, but also the right kind of locks. So there's a number of different best practice guidelines which are available to members. And as a member, they also get put onto our members directory, which means they're also on our map, so people can see where they're located. And also, we just try to make it that they can talk to each other. And I'm getting a lot of different people talking to each other, often through the CSTA. Not that they wouldn't anyway, but I think they sometimes feel more comfortable talking to each other with, as part of members of the same association. So it's that kind of community and networking.
And of course, you host events as well, like the recent conference. So.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And that's something which is open to everyone in actual fact, but it is special rates to members, and I think members feel more comfortable coming along if companies feel more comfortable coming along if they are a member of the association. It's their event, and that's very much how I'd like to see it, that they feel that this is them talking to each other and using the event for their own benefit, and they certainly enjoy meeting each other because we're all living as a sort of island, really. We working in our own individual self-storage facility, so they don't often have a chance to meet up. So it's quite good for them. They know each other, but actually meeting each other face to face is a good opportunity.
You can't really beat getting people together like that, can you? And that was one of the things we found just going to the conference, that it was great to just like meet people face to face, have a chat about storage, have a chat about life in general or business in general, and really, it's good to know, like, you've got those contacts there then that you can speak to. And I can imagine, certainly from a self-storage operator perspective, because it is very much a regionalized thing, isn't it? It's geographically, you are a real estate asset in effect, and you're operating within that realm. And so it's nice to come together with other people that probably aren't your direct competitor necessarily, because they might be in a slightly different area, but you can compare notes. And
also we try to put together the conference program which gives people a feel, that makes them think about what they're doing, whether it's to do with financing their containers or insuring their containers, or the type of paints and so on that they're using for their containers. So it's trying to make them think a little bit beyond security being a big issue. And you remember one of the presentations, the guy was talking about the intrusions that he had into what he was doing.
Good. That was one of my favorites, to be honest. It was really good to hear what they did and how they're tackling it now.
And he was very open about what had happened, wasn't he? I think, he was very open as to the fact that they were targeting certain containers and how he was tackling them.
Yeah, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when they had the loud tannoy shouting at any potential intruders, sort of how that played out. But imagine it gave them a shock anyway, the intruders. And of course you have the awards as well, which we were very grateful to receive one, but it's nice for members to have that recognition as well, isn't it? And good for business and PR.
Yeah, we were actually very pleasantly surprised at the number of entries we'd had and the quality of entries as well. So and I think it's good for people to be recognised for the work they're doing, and we'll be doing a little bit more publicity about that in the next week or so. So congratulations on your award, but it's a good entry.
Pride of place on the background.
Thank you. Yes. It's a funny thing. I mean, awards, I think people can really make use of them as well, and say that this is something that's an industry achievement. So we were pleasantly surprised by the number of entries we had and the quality of entries.
Good. So tell me, Patrick, what's the future for the CSTA? What do you see? How do you see it developing?
Well, certainly we're still getting new members. I mean, we think that there are in the region of 600. I mean, you may have got the same sort of figures, but 600 separate operators in the UK, operating about 900 different sites. So we did a container self-storage census 2 years ago, and the idea is to run another one of those. It's difficult to get all the numbers, but we think that's quite a useful industry guideline. So that's one of the projects for the second half of the year. We do think there are more members, and we are still getting more members joining. So, but it's not just a question of new members. We also got to make sure we provide the right kind of service. So I think we need to go back to some of our operational guidelines. I do think it's quite important to have things in place which should give operational guidelines, and maybe some other reports on what sort of containers people might want. Just looking at some of the industry information that we can give out.
Yeah.
The other thing is, although it hasn't developed yet, we do get inquiries from businesses abroad, and generally speaking, we see container self-storage as a UK phenomenon. Okay, there's some in the North American market, but at the moment we are also getting inquiries for people who are thinking of starting container self-storage in Spain and in France and Netherlands and so on. So we'd like to develop that. We do have members who are container traders there, but container self-storage, we'd like to develop that. Right. Maybe they don't always have the same problem in terms of space, and maybe in the UK we just have too much stuff, so we don't know throwing away.
I imagine a huge opportunity there would be to just, clad the roof of them all with solar panels as well.
Generate some energy and all the rest of it. Yeah,
absolutely. Oh, that's good to hear anyway. So no, thank you very much, Patrick. You got a busy weekend ahead of you?
Yes and no. I'm actually, sadly, I've got a lot of my own administration to do. It's sort of caught up. I had a busy 3 months. I'm running big conference on lithium-ion batteries. One of the inquiries I had recently was about storing lithium-ion batteries in self-storage, because you may have noticed, but there are quite a lot of fires with electric scooters and so on. And so we've also been looking at that. We did a big conference on the shipping market on lithium-ion batteries in March. And then I was a big meeting in Munich in May, and then this meeting in Manchester, and I was in Antwerp a couple of weeks ago. So unfortunately, I'm going to do a little bit of my own personal administration. But I think I'm playing a little bit of golf now and then, and I go sailing. So a little bit of sailing, a little bit of golf as well.
It sounds like a nice balance anyway.
I'm also into doing some running as well. So a little bit of running.
Right, just throw that into the mix.
Park run? Do you know?
Oh, yes, yeah.
We do park run. There's a local park run in Bushy Park near us. So
great.
They get a lot of people. They get 1,500 people turn up there on a Saturday morning. So.
Brilliant. God, that's great, isn't it?
Yes, we do that on a Saturday morning. Gets us out of bed. Yeah.
I think that would be an interesting thing if they had on Anglesey, because pretty much that would be. Oh, I'm not sure what the population is, but just imagine.
Have you ever done it? Do you know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about, don't you?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. Yeah, we don't have obviously that over here, but then we are blessed with beaches, so yeah.
Make the most of that, exactly.
We'll make the most of that for a run in the morning. But it's been lovely speaking to you, Patrick. Thank you very much for your time, and look forward to the next conference. And
we're starting to plan that already. Already have people saying, where are you going to do the next one? So we're going to be thinking about that. And then we've got a few things beforehand. And by the way, we will continue with the webinars. I mean, although we like the face-to-face, I think the webinars are good things. So maybe you and I can talk about Xplorage during a webinar at some point. I think it's important. I think that's one of the things we did learn in the pandemic, that you can get over webinar and over Zoomed and all the rest of it. At the time, it's actually quite nice to have a 20-minute, half-an-hour webinar, and people can dial in, and you don't have to move from your desk, and it's a good way of communicating. So we're going to be continuing with that. So to answer your other question, we will continue with the webinars as well as the meetings. Yeah.
Great. Well, no, I look forward to it, and let's pick up on that again soon then. Thanks, Patrick.
Nice to see you then, Anna. Thanks, Daniel. Bye-bye.